My aunt slammed the door in my face at Thanksgiving, telling me to go away. I saw my whole family inside, saying nothing. But they didn't know I was about to find the one thing my mom left me, a letter that would burn their whole world down. The scent of oak is the scent of honesty. It's a clean, sharp, almost spicy smell that fills your lungs and tells you you're working with something real, something that had a life before it came to you. In my workshop, that honesty is the only currency that matters. Here, there's no room for lies. A joint is either true or it's not. A finish is either flawless or it's a failure. There is no in-between. For the past week, my world had shrunk to the four corners of a small, intricately carved music box. It was a replica of one my mother had loved, a simple thing from her childhood that was lost in a move decades ago. I was making it for my father. Oak for strength, walnut for the inlaid details, and a small, Swiss-made movement that played Claire de Lune, her favorite piece. My hands, calloused and mapped with the fine, silvery lines of old cuts, moved with a certainty they lacked anywhere else in my life. The chisel felt like an extension of my fingers, peeling away paper-thin curls of wood to reveal the form hidden within. This was my sanctuary. This was where I made sense. The phone call from my dad 2 weeks ago had been an intrusion, a foreign sound in a world of familiar noises, the scrape of a handplane, the hum of the dust collector, the soft whisk of a finishing brush. His voice was hesitant, stretched thin over the 400 miles that separated us. "Ethan? It's Dad." "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" I'd asked, my guard already up. It was always the first question. "Everything's fine, son. Fine. Listen, Thanksgiving is coming up. Your Aunt Carol is cooking, of course. We were hoping you'd make the drive." Silence. Not a comfortable one. It was a silence filled with 3 years of things left unsaid, of holidays missed and calls that went to voicemail. "I don't know, Dad. It's a busy time. A weak excuse." We both knew it. "Please, Ethan," he'd said, and for a moment, the weariness in his voice cut through my defenses. "Just for the day. It would mean a lot." In the background, I could hear her voice, a stage whisper that was meant to be heard. "Aunt Carol. Don't get your hopes up, David." I'd agreed, of course. A part of me always did, the part that hadn't given up yet. Now, as I applied the final coat of oil to the music box, the wood drinking it in and glowing with a deep, satin luster, I felt that old, familiar knot tighten in my gut. It was a mix of hope and dread, a cocktail I'd been sipping for years. I looked around my shop. The stacks of lumber, the neatly arranged tools on the wall, the half-finished restoration of a 19th century writing desk. It was all orderly. It was all controllable. Tomorrow, I would be driving into chaos. My mind drifted back to a Thanksgiving from 5 years ago. Mom was still here, though the illness was just beginning to cast its long shadow. I was 29, full of piss and vinegar, and I'd just landed a commission that I thought would change my life, restoring all the woodwork in a historic library. The deadline was brutal. I called 2 days before the holiday and canceled. I could still hear my mother's voice, laced with a disappointment she tried so hard to hide. "We'll miss you, honey. Just be safe." The project turned out to be a financial disaster. I barely broke even, but the real cost was the ammunition it gave my Aunt Carol. She never let me forget it. At the funeral 3 years ago, she'd pulled me aside, her grip on my arm surprisingly strong. "Your mother waited for you that day," she'd whispered, her eyes cold. She sat at that table and kept looking at the door, hoping her brilliant, busy son would remember his family. It was a lie, a twisting of the truth. Mom had called me that night, and we'd talk for an hour. But Carol's version of the story, polished and perfected over time, had become the official family narrative. Ethan, the one who left. Ethan, the one who thought he was too good for them. Ethan, the one who broke his mother's heart. And the worst part? A small, treacherous part of me wondered if she was right. I had chosen work. I had missed that dinner. I had started the crack, and maybe they just widened it. I closed the lid of the music box. The soft click echoed in the quiet shop. A gift was supposed to be a peace offering. But as I prepared for the long drive home, it felt more like carrying a shield in a battle. The 400-mile drive was a long, gray ribbon of asphalt and contemplation. I-80 cutting through Pennsylvania in late November is a study in monochrome. The trees are skeletal, the sky is the color of lead, and the world seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the first heavy snow. I drove in silence, the music box wrapped in a soft cloth on the passenger seat, a silent companion. With every mile marker that passed, the carefully constructed walls of my workshop, my orderly life, seemed to crumble. The confident carpenter, the man who could bring dead wood back to life, slowly receded, replaced by the son, the nephew, the brother. A role I no longer knew how to play. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I'd be polite. I'd be patient. I wouldn't rise to the bait. I would talk to my dad about the business, ask my brother Mark about his kids, and compliment Aunt Carol on her turkey. I would be the version of me they claimed they wanted. As I turned off the highway and onto the familiar country roads, a knot of nostalgia and anxiety formed in my stomach. There was the old stone bridge where I'd caught my first fish with Dad. There was the corner market where Mom used to buy pumpkins. Each landmark was a ghost. Then I saw it. The house. A two-story colonial my grandfather had built, sitting on a gentle rise, surrounded by ancient oak trees. Lights blazed from every window, a beacon of warmth against the twilight gloom. For a fleeting, foolish moment, it looked like home. I could almost imagine Mom opening the door, her face breaking into a wide, genuine smile, the scent of cinnamon and roasting turkey spilling out into the cold air. But then reality set in. I pulled into the driveway, the crunch of gravel under my tires sounding unnervously loud. There were a half-dozen cars already there, including my brother Mark's oversized SUV and a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I grabbed the wrapped music box, my hands feeling clumsy and strange. "Okay, Ethan, you can do this." I walked up the stone path. Through the bay window, I could see them. A tableau from a holiday card. My family, all gathered in the dining room, bathed in the warm glow of the chandelier. I saw my dad at the head of the table. I saw Mark, laughing at something his wife said. And I saw an older, well-dressed man I didn't know, sitting next to my father. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rang the doorbell. The laughter inside stopped. I saw movement, a shadow detaching from a group. The door swung open, and there she was. Aunt Carol. She wore a festive apron over a silk blouse, a pearl necklace at her throat. She looked every bit the gracious matriarch. But her eyes, cold and sharp as chips of ice, gave her away. She took in my appearance, my simple wool coat, the gift in my hand, and a flicker of something, maybe triumph, crossed her face. Her smile was a thin, brittle thing. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth as cream, but with an underlying chill. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you to abandon your work for us." The barb landed exactly as intended, a perfectly aimed dart hitting the old wound. She was letting me know from the first second, nothing had changed. "Happy Thanksgiving, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad invited me. She didn't move from the doorway, blocking my path. She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "An invitation from a man with a soft heart," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Well, come in, I suppose. Don't stand there letting the heat out." She stepped aside, not with a welcoming gesture, but with the grudging air of someone letting in a stray cat. I stepped over the threshold into the oppressive silence of a home that no longer felt like mine. The warmth of the house was a lie. It didn't reach my skin. As I stepped into the foyer, the low hum of conversation in the dining room died, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. It felt like walking into a vacuum. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes locked onto me. It was a receiving line of judgment. My brother, Mark, sat next to his wife, a smirk playing on his lips. He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Look what the cat dragged in," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. A few of my cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between me, Mark, and my aunt. I looked towards the head of the table. My father, David, sat frozen, his hand gripping the large carving knife next to the golden brown turkey. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. The man in the black sedan next to him, who I now recognized as Mr. Henderson, a man who had been my father's business partner for 30 years, looked at me with open curiosity, a guest at a play he didn't know he'd be attending. Aunt Carol closed the front door behind me with a soft, final click. She moved past me, her step silent and purposeful, and stood at the entrance to the dining room, placing herself squarely between me and the rest of the family. She was a gatekeeper. "Ethan," she began, her voice low but carrying in the tense silence. "This isn't going to work." I just stood there, my hand still holding the wrapped gift, feeling foolish and exposed. "What's not going to work, Aunt Carol?" She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more humiliating than a shout. "This, you being here, we're having a peaceful family dinner." She gestured vaguely towards the table, as if presenting a rare and fragile exhibit. "This is for the family that stayed, the family that cared, the ones who were here through the hard times." Every word was a stone, carefully chosen and thrown with precision. My past failure, my move, my entire life since leaving, all of it was condensed into that one phrase, the family that stayed. Dad asked me to come. I managed to say, my throat tight. I finally risked another glance at him. He flinched, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the knife, but he remained silent, a statue of a patriarch. He was abdicating. Aunt Carol's eyes hardened. "And I'm uninviting you," she said, her voice now sharp and clear, all pretense of softness gone. "Your father is too sentimental. He forgets the drama you bring. He forgets the disruption. We're finally in a good place. We don't need you to come back for a few hours, play the prodigal son, and then disappear again, leaving us to clean up the emotional mess." She paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. "We've saved you the trouble of leaving. Go back to your projects." The word projects was coated in disdain, as if my life's work, the craft I had poured my soul into, was nothing more than a child's hobby. The silence that followed was absolute. No one defended me. Not one cousin, not one uncle, and not my father. I saw it all in that moment. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty from my aunt. This was a coup that had happened long ago. She was merely announcing her victory. I looked from her cold, triumphant face to the averted gaze of my father. I saw Mark's smug satisfaction. I saw the discomfort and cowardice on the faces around the table. And I saw the stunned disbelief on the face of the one outsider, Mr. Henderson. He was the only one who looked horrified. A slow, cold clarity washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of hope. The anger hadn't arrived yet. The grief was too deep to register. All I felt was a profound, bottomless emptiness. There was nothing left to fight for here. They had already won. I looked at my father one last time, a long, searching look. I wanted him to see me. I wanted to burn this moment into his memory. He finally, slowly, lifted his head. His eyes were filled with a terrible, helpless shame. I gave a short, sharp nod. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible. "I understand." I turned, placed the carefully wrapped music box on the small mahogany table in the foyer, next to a vase of silk flowers. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply opened it, stepped back out into the biting November wind, and closed it gently behind me, leaving them to their peaceful family dinner. The engine turned over on the first try, a small mercy in a world that had suddenly run out of them. I backed out of the driveway, my movements stiff and robotic. I didn't look at the house in the rearview mirror. I just drove. The hollow space in my chest was so vast it felt like a physical injury, a place where something had been violently scooped out. My mind was a blank slate. The carefully rehearsed conversations, the anxieties, the hopes, all gone. There was only the hum of the tires on the cold pavement and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers clearing a light, misty rain. 5 minutes down the road, my phone buzzed in the center console. The screen lit up, Dad. I ignored it. Let it ring. Let it go to the silence it deserved. It rang again immediately after. And again. On the fifth call, I swiped to decline. A minute later, it started again. One call after another. A frantic, desperate pulse. He was panicking. Good. On the 10th call, a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress made me answer. I put on speaker. "What?" I said, my voice flat and dead. Ethan, thank God. Don't hang up. Please don't hang up. His voice was shaky, breathless. In the background, I could hear chaos, a door slamming, raised voices. I could make out Aunt Carol's sharp tone. Let him go, David. For heaven's sake, you're making a scene. Where are you? He pleaded, ignoring her. On my way home, I said calmly. No, stop. Please turn back. I didn't know, Ethan. I swear to God, I didn't know she was going to do that. You were sitting right there, I stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. I froze. I'm a coward. Oh God. There was a thud, the sound of him moving quickly. I heard the jingle of keys. I'm coming to get you. Just pull over. Please, son. Wait for me. The line went dead. I stared at the road ahead. He was coming to get me. The man who couldn't even look at me 10 minutes ago was now chasing my car down the highway. The thought was so absurd it was almost funny. A few miles later, I pulled into the crumbling parking lot of a long-abandoned gas station. The pumps were rusted skeletons, the windows boarded up. It felt appropriate. I cut the engine and sat in the deepening gloom, the silence of my car a welcome relief. Minutes later, headlights sliced through the dusk. My dad's silver Subaru swerved into the lot, parking haphazardly next to me. The driver's door flew open before the car had even fully stopped. He practically fell out, his coat half-zipped, his face pale and stricken under the ghostly security light. He came to my window and knocked, his knuckles rapping urgently against the glass. I didn't move. He just stood there, his chest heaving, looking lost and old. Finally, I lowered the window an inch. I saw your face, Ethan, he choked out, his voice raw. When you looked at me, right before you left. I haven't felt that ashamed since the day your mother died, and I let Carol take over. I remained silent, giving him nothing. It wasn't just grief, son, he confessed, his eyes pleading with me to understand. I was a coward. It's the God's honest truth. After your mom was gone, this house, it was so empty, so quiet. Carol just filled the space. She made the decisions. She organized everything. And it was easier. It was easier to believe her version of the story, her narrative that you were the distant one, than to face how badly I was failing as a father. Easier than facing this empty house alone. I let her build a wall between us, brick by brick. And tonight, I watched her lay the last one while I just sat there. He reached into his coat pocket, his hand trembling. He pulled out a folded, yellowed envelope. It looked ancient. After you left, he said, his voice dropping. Henderson, he just looked at me. Didn't say a word, just looked. It was worse than if he'd yelled. The shame, it was suffocating. I had to get out of that room. I went to the liquor cabinet to get the good scotch, the one Eleanor saved for special occasions. And I found this, taped to the bottom of the cabinet, hidden behind a false back I never knew existed. He held the envelope out to me. My name was on the front, written in my mother's elegant, familiar script. For Ethan, to be open upon my death. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers felt numb as I took it from him. A letter my mother had left for me. A letter that had been hidden for 3 years. The paper was thick and brittle, the edges softened by time. The envelope wasn't sealed. It had been opened. The thought sent a jolt of ice-cold fury through me, so sharp and pure it momentarily eclipsed the hollowness. Someone had read this. My father saw the look on my face. It was already opened, Ethan, he said quietly. She read it. Carol read your mother's last words to you, and then she hid them. With trembling hands, I pulled out the single sheet of folded stationery inside. The ink was a faded blue, but her handwriting was as clear as if she'd written it yesterday. I unfolded it under the weak dome light of my car, my father watching me, his face a mask of misery. My dearest Ethan, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means my time is up, and I'm likely floating around somewhere watching you, prouder than you can ever imagine. Please don't be too sad for too long. I've lived a life full of love, largely because I had you and your father in it. I'm writing this because I have a mother's instinct, and it's telling me that things might get difficult after I'm gone. I see the fault lines in our family, my love. I know you feel them too. I know you feel the distance, and I need you to know, with every fiber of your being, that it is not your fault. You were born with a fire in you, a need to create, to build. I have never seen that as you leaving us. I have only ever seen it as you becoming yourself. Don't let them use your ambition against you, my dear boy. The world needs people who build beautiful things. It's an honorable calling. Your grandfather would have been so proud of the man you've become. My eyes stung. I blinked hard, refusing to cry. Not here. Not now. I read on. There are practical matters I must address. Your father, he will be lost for a while. Grief will be a heavy coat on his shoulders, and he may not see things clearly. Be patient with him. Forgive him if he stumbles, but do not let him forget his own strength. He is a good man who has forgotten how to fight. As for your Aunt Carol, be careful. I love my sister, but her insecurities are a hungry ghost. She has lived in my shadow for so long. She may try to extinguish your light to make her own feel brighter. Do not feed that ghost. Do not let her rewrite our family's history. She sees your talent not as a gift, but as a judgment on her own life choices. And then came the final, devastating paragraph. That is why I have formalized my wishes with my lawyer, and Henderson is aware of them as well. My half of the company my father and has started, Henderson and Son Woodworks, is to be entrusted to you. Not just the shares, but the stewardship. Mark has no love for the craft, only the balance sheet. And Carol would sell it for parts if it suited her. Only you, Ethan, understand the soul of what we built. It is my final wish that you protect it. You are the carpenter. You know how to care for things that are meant to last. Know that I love you. Always. Don't let them silence you. Mom. I read the letter twice, then a third time. The words on the page weren't just words. They were a key, a weapon, a shield. They were the truth, a truth that had been deliberately buried. The gaslighting, the whispers, the years of feeling like I was the problem, that I was the one who had abandoned them. It was all a lie. A calculated, cruel lie designed to disinherit me not just for my family's love, but for my mother's legacy. I looked up from the letter, the paper crinkling in my clenched fist. I looked at my father, who hadn't moved, just stood there in the cold, awaiting his judgment. A new feeling was rising in me, hot and sharp, burning away the cold emptiness. It was rage, a clean, righteous rage. Get in your car, Dad, I said, my voice low and hard as forged steel. We're going back. The drive back to the house was a reversal of the first trip, not just in direction, but in spirit. The silence in the car was no longer the hollow echo of despair. It was the charged, heavy silence of an approaching storm. I drove my car, and my father followed in his, a two-car procession on a mission. The numbness in my chest had been replaced by a pulsing, focused anger. I wasn't a rejected son crawling back. I was an executor of my mother's will, and I was coming to hold court. My father, who had looked so broken and small in the gas station parking lot, now seemed to be gathering a new resolve. I could see it in the way his headlights stayed steady in my rearview mirror, a constant, supportive presence. The cowardice he had confessed to was being burned away by the shame of his inaction and the clarity of his wife's final words. He was no longer a passive observer. He was my ally. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The warm, inviting lights now seemed harsh, like theatrical spotlights on a stage set for a final, ugly act. The party was clearly over. A few cars were gone. The remaining guests were likely trapped in an awkward post-confrontation limbo. We got out of our cars and met at the foot of the stone path. My father looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in 3 years. "Are you ready for this, son?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just tapped the breast pocket of my coat, where the letter now rested. It was all the answer he needed. We walked up the path together, side by side. The front door opened before we reached it. It was Mr. Henderson. He was putting on his overcoat, his face grim. He stopped when he saw us. He looked at me, then at my father. He nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding in his eyes. "David," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was just leaving. I've seen enough theater for one evening." "Don't go yet, Jim," my father said, his voice firm. "The play's not over. We're just getting to the third act." Mr. Henderson paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at my face, at the cold resolve there, and then back at my father. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and stepped back inside, holding the door for us. We walked in. The scene in the dining room was fractured. My brother Mark and his wife were standing by the fireplace, talking in hushed, agitated tones. Aunt Carol was directing one of my cousins to clear the table, her movements sharp and brittle, her face a tight mask of forced composure. She was trying to erase the ugliness, to restore order. She froze when she saw us. All pretense of control vanished, replaced by a flash of pure fury in her eyes. "David, what is the meaning of this?" she snapped. "You don't chase after him and then bring him back here. This family has had enough of his drama for one night." My father walked past her without a word, taking his place at the head of the table. He stood there, tall and solid, no longer a slumped figure of grief. He was the master of the house again. "Sit down, Carol," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with an authority she hadn't heard in years. "Mark, you too." "Jim," he motioned to Mr. Henderson, "please stay." Everyone stared, stunned, as I walked to the center of the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I let the weight of my presence fill the space. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the yellowed envelope, and placed it gently in the middle of the dining table, right next to the untouched bowl of cranberry sauce. It landed with a soft, definitive sound. The sound of a gauntlet being thrown down. "What is that?" Aunt Carol asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. She eyed the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. I didn't look at her. I looked at my brother. "It's Mom's final words," I said, my voice even and cold. "The ones you all made sure I never saw." Mark's face went pale. He shot a panicked glance at Carol. "That's ridiculous," he stammered. "We don't know anything about that." "Don't you, Mark?" I asked softly. This was taped to the bottom of her liquor cabinet, a place you both cleaned out for Dad the week after she died. "You're telling me you missed this?" Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked trapped. "Your mother was sick, Ethan." Carol cut in, regaining her footing. She adopted a tone of patronizing sympathy. "She wasn't in her right mind when she passed. We can't be held accountable for the ramblings of a sick woman." She was lucid enough to understand what was happening in her own home. My father's voice boomed from the head of the table, making both of them jump. She was lucid enough to write this. "You don't know what it says." Carol shot back. "It's probably just sentimental nonsense." "Then you won't mind if I read it aloud?" I said, reaching for the letter. "No." The shriek was so sudden, so raw, it startled everyone. Carol's mask of composure had shattered completely. "That is private. It's a personal letter. You have no right." "She had no right," my father thundered, pointing a finger at his sister-in-law. "That letter is addressed to her son." It was then that Mr. Henderson, who had been watching the entire exchange with a grim expression, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it cut through the hysteria like a razor. "Actually, I think I can shed some light on this," he said, stepping forward. Everyone turned to look at him. Eleanor was perfectly lucid, Carol. In fact, she was sharper than ever in her final months. He looked directly at me. "She called me Ethan about a month before she passed. She was worried. She told me she was formalizing her wishes regarding the business." He then turned his gaze, cold and heavy, onto Carol and Mark. "She also told me why. She asked me to act as a second witness, to hold a copy of her instructions, because she said, and I remember her exact words, 'Sometimes, Jim, family can't be trusted to honor family.'" The room went dead silent. It was a direct hit, a torpedo to the hull of their entire deception. My mother, in her wisdom, had created a failsafe. Mr. Henderson wasn't finished. He looked at Carol. "She was worried about you specifically, Carol. She said you always saw the business as a bank, not a legacy." "And Mark?" He turned to my brother, who looked like he was about to be sick. "She said you had your father's heart but Carol's ear, and that it was a dangerous combination." Carol stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. She had been outmaneuvered by a ghost. My father stood up. "I have been a fool," he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I let grief and weakness blind me. I let my son be treated like an outcast in his own home. I let my wife's memory be dishonored by pettiness and greed." He picked up the letter from the table. "This ends now. According to this letter, And, as confirmed by Jim, Eleanor's 50% share of Henderson and Son Woodworks, and the stewardship thereof, belongs to Ethan. Mark's head snapped up. What? That's half the business. Yes, it is, my father said coldly. And until this is all sorted out legally, all company accounts are frozen. All executive decisions are suspended. You, he looked at Mark, are relieved of your managerial duties, effective immediately. The fallout was immediate and ugly. You can't do that, Mark yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. I've given my life to this company, while he was off playing with sawdust. And in doing so, you dishonored the man who built it and the woman who loved you, my father replied, his voice unwavering. You made your choice. Aunt Carol, seeing her control and her potential financial gain evaporating before her eyes, turned on me, her face twisted with a rage that was terrifying in its purity. You did this, she hissed. You came back just to ruin us. You were always a selfish, dramatic child, and you haven't changed a bit. For years, those words would have cut me to the bone. They would have fed the little voice of doubt in the back of my mind. But not anymore. The letter had been more than ink on paper. It had been an antidote to a poison I'd been fed for years. I walked over to the foyer table and picked up the music box I had left there. I brought it back and held it in my hands. For years, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. I let you convince me that I was the one who introduced the cracks into this family, that my choices, my life, were the problem. I even started to believe it myself. I looked down at the smooth, oiled wood in my hands. But I'm a carpenter. I spend my days working with wood. I know the difference between a clean cut and a festering rot. I know how to find a weakness in a beam, the flaw that can bring the whole structure down. I raised my eyes and met hers. You, I said, my voice dropping lower, are the rot. You didn't just widen a crack. You hollowed out this family from the inside with your jealousy and your lies. You tried to turn something beautiful that my mother built into something ugly and warped, just to serve yourself. I turned to my brother, and you let her, because it was easier than being a man your mother would have been proud of. I didn't wait for a response. I turned to my father. I'm going now. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with a sad, newfound respect. As I walked toward the door, I wound the small key on the bottom of the music box. I opened the lid, and the clear, delicate notes of Clair de Lune filled the tense, poisoned air. It was a melody of heartbreaking beauty, a ghost of my mother's presence in the room. I let it play for a few moments, a final, haunting farewell. Then I closed the lid, silencing the music. I didn't leave the box this time. It was my legacy. It was her memory. It was mine to protect. I walked out the door with my father following me, leaving them standing in the ruins of the world they had built. Weeks melted into a cold, bleak winter. The legal fallout was messy, but with Mr. Henderson's testimony and the notarized documents he had kept, the outcome was never in doubt. Carol and Mark were legally and financially sidelined. They tried to fight it, of course, launching a smear campaign among distant relatives, but the truth, once out, has a weight of its own. I didn't pay much attention to it. I had other work to do. My father started making the 4-hour drive to my workshop every weekend. At first, it was awkward. We were two men who had forgotten how to speak to each other, the space between us cluttered with years of unspoken grief and resentment. So we didn't talk. We worked. I put him to work on the 19th century writing desk I was restoring. It was his grandfather's, a piece that had sat in their attic for 50 years, neglected and forgotten. It seemed fitting. I taught him how to strip the old, cracked varnish, how to sand with the grain, how to feel the wood and listen to what it needed. His hands, accustomed to pens and spreadsheets, were clumsy at first, but he was a patient student. In the shared silence of the workshop, broken only by the rasp of sandpaper and the scent of sawdust, we began to rebuild. We didn't talk about the night of Thanksgiving. We didn't talk about Carol or Mark. We talked about the wood. We talked about his father, my grandfather, the man who had originally built the desk. He told me stories I'd never heard about my mother as a little girl, sneaking into the workshop to steal wood scraps for her own little projects. One Saturday, as we were cleaning out the desk drawers before applying the new finish, my father found a small, hidden compartment at the back. Inside was a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were letters my mother had written to a college friend, letters she had printed out from her email to keep. We sat there on dusty stools and read them. They were full of her life, her hopes, her frustrations, and they confirmed everything. We read about her worries over Carol's growing bitterness, her disappointment in Mark's lack of direction, and her boundless pride in me, the son who had the courage to build his own life. Finding them wasn't a dramatic twist. It was a quiet, sad confirmation, the final closing of a painful case file. "She saw it all," my father murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he folded a letter. "She saw it all coming, and I didn't listen." "You're listening now, Dad," I said quietly. And he was. We finished the desk in early February. It was beautiful. The tiger oak grain seemed to ripple under the light, glowing with a deep, warm fire. My father ran his hand over the smooth surface, a look of quiet awe on his face. He looked like he had restored a piece of his own soul. He stayed in town now, in a small apartment not far from me. He was semi-retired, but he had taken a new interest in the business. Not the balance sheets, but the craft. He was helping me source rare woods, talking to old clients, and reconnecting with the legacy he had almost let slip away. I received an email from my cousin James one day. A short, simple apology for his silence. It meant more than he knew. I never heard from Aunt Carol again. Mark sent one long, rambling text message 6 months later, a bizarre mix of self-pity and blame that never once contained the words, "I'm sorry." I deleted it without a reply. They were ghosts from a life that was no longer mine. My real family was here. It was my father, his hands dusted with sawdust. It was Mr. Henderson, who called every week to check in. It was the memory of my mother, a presence that was no longer a source of pain, but one of strength and guidance. That evening, after Dad had gone home, I stood alone in the quiet of my workshop. I walked over to the restored writing desk, a testament to what can be saved from the past. I took out the music box, my mother's music box, and placed it on the corner of the desk. I wound the key and opened the lid. The clear, hopeful notes of Claire de Lune filled the air. It wasn't a song of mourning anymore. It was a song of restoration. They had tried to lock the door on me, to write me out of the story, but I'd found my way back. And this time, I wasn't just a guest in the house. I was one of the builders, laying down a new foundation, one built of honesty, forgiveness, and good, solid wood.